There's a lot of people around the world that love sprouts, and there are a few people that love sprouts and they know why they love sprouts. And it's an honor to sit here with Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, author of Fiber Fueled, gastroenterologist, and we're going to go deep on sprouts. So he's been on a lot of other podcasts and he's written best-selling books, Fiber Fueled, the Fiber Fueled Cookbook, but here we're going to focus in on sprouts and sprouting. So, Will, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Doug. My wife started making smoothies with broccoli sprouts before we had kids. And there was a curiosity, geez, what's going on here? What's the deal with this? And you start to dig into it. And you unlock an entire world of science that very few medical doctors have ever looked at. And that's not a critique of medical doctors, but you have to get down into the nutritional rabbit hole to really dig into the healing benefits of sprouts, because this was not, even within nutritional spaces, Doug, as you know, 10 years ago, this was not mainstream. Yep. And now we're bringing it to mainstream because this is a game changer. And I'm quite proud to be like an early adopter and on that cutting edge with you. Because when I wrote my book, Fiber Fueled, that as far as I can recall, you and I hadn't even met, I don't think.
No.
And so my book, Fiber Fueled, came out in 2020, but I did most of the writing in 2018 and 2019. And in Fiber Fueled, there was a specific section where basically I was heralding the benefits and the properties of sprouts, specifically broccoli sprouts. But I also have to credit you, because it was actually this book, the Sprout book, that changed my perspective on sprouts. And it stopped being about just broccoli sprouts and started being about all sprouts. All sprouts are an important part of a daily diet that we all should have.
Yeah, amazing. I remember Rich Roll introduced us because we had both recorded the Rich Roll podcast.
That's right.
And then I sent you my book, you sent me your book. Our books both came out during COVID.
Yeah.
And, you know, and here we are, you know, it's almost 5 years later.
Yeah, it's crazy how time flies. In some ways, I feel like there was this time vacuum that took place over the last few years, and here we are. But yet, at the same time, a lot has changed, and I think that what we are discovering every single month, there are new studies showing us the benefits of sprouts. And it's so to me, this is, again, a conversation that goes so far beyond where I was when I wrote Fiber Fueled that I'm really glad that we get to talk about this in more detail today.
Yeah, I mean, one of the insights that I had when I wrote the book was that I knew sprouts were healthy. I'd been sprouting for 30 years.
Yeah.
Right? But I didn't know what I know now. And so when I had the time and the space and I went deep and I had full access to all of the literature, and like my 3 takeaways, number 1 was that sprouts were vegetables. They weren't just this little side dish or garnish. They were full on fiber-fueled vegetables. Number 2, they were vitamins and minerals. And I had read the literature that vitamins and minerals in a supplement form actually can do more harm than good, that the best way to get the vitamins and minerals were in a whole food form, and sprouts were whole food. And then the third thing, which totally blew my mind and had me like drop everything else, was that sprouts were medicine. So talk to me a little bit about your perspective of sprouts being medicine.
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the recognition that many of our modern medicines, we're so disconnected because we just see the pill and take the pill and have the effect. And what we lose sight of is the development and the understanding of where that came from. In many cases, the concept comes from plants. And so like the classic the origin of our modern sort of pharmaceutical approach is aspirin, right? Developed by Bayer back in the 19th century, but Bayer was not the first one to take the concept of willow bark and apply it for human health and human benefit. I mean, that goes back to like ancient Egypt, right? So we've been using plants for their medicinal properties for a very long time. It's part also of healing traditions that are not allopathic medicine, but like Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, right? And where sprouts are different is the amplification of these particular phytonutrients or phytochemicals. So what's unique is that, for example, let's talk about broccoli and broccoli sprouts.
Yes.
So since I was a child, I have been taught, by my family, by others, that broccoli is good. Broccoli protects us from cancer. Therefore, we should eat more broccoli. Okay, that's great. That message is accurate. But what wasn't explained is why. The reason why is because broccoli contains these specific chemicals exclusive to plants, specific to cruciferous family plants. Cruciferous meaning like broccoli and cabbage and arugula, things like this. So anyway, they have these specific chemicals, glucosinolates, and these enzymes, and when they mix together, they release what are called isothiocyanates. And Doug, it's the isothiocyanates found in broccoli and other cruciferous vegetables that protect us from cancer, reduce our cancer risk. Okay. The classic one, the one that they're studying at Johns Hopkins, the one that is like increasingly capturing our attention in the scientific literature is sulforaphane. Sulforaphane, if you compare broccoli sprouts to broccoli, mature broccoli, ounce for ounce, gram for gram, you will find 50 to 100 times more sulforaphane coming from broccoli sprouts than you would receive from eating broccoli. So when my wife lines up that smoothie on a daily basis, she can throw in a cup of broccoli sprouts and provide the type of healing power that you would have to throw in like 2 heads of broccoli to match that.
And how did your wife discover this?
That's an interesting question. My wife has been very tapped into the plant-based nutritional world for a very long time. And I think for her, so it's interesting, there's many paths that lead us to where we are. Like, I'm sure you have your story of how you ended up in this space and eating sprouts 30 years ago. That's not a coincidence, right? So for my wife, it started from an ethical perspective. So she was 5 years old, and someone told her, she's an animal lover, and someone told her how the cows get killed, right? A bolt to the head. And she went home and was mortified. And after crying her brains out, her parents said, we're not going to ever eat that food again. And they stopped eating that food. They moved into a plant-based diet. And so my wife ate this way, and it worked for her, and it brought her great health. And, in this process, she paid attention to what was happening in the plant-based world and what she could eat. And one of the things that she discovered, because my wife is like a master researcher and highly intelligent, is she discovered broccoli sprouts. And that was, I don't know, I can't speak for her. I do know, though, that from the time we started dating, this was a part of her life.
So when was that? How long have you been together?
More than 10 years. 10-year anniversary was this year. So,
wow, congratulations.
Yeah.
Wow, you built a big family pretty fast.
Yeah. We're good at making babies, Doug.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So what are the benefits of consuming grains and legumes, and what's the difference between eating the grains and legumes in the traditional way of steaming them or pressure cooking them and sprouting them?
Yeah. So first of all, if we look at, deficiencies that exist within the United States, whether or not our diet is meeting the recommended amount of a food, fiber is like one of our most prevalent deficiencies. 95% of Americans are deficient in fiber, Doug. All right, there's one specific food group, though, that actually the deficiency goes beyond this, and it's whole grains. 98% of Americans are not consuming an adequate amount of whole grains. And legumes and other pulses, the average American is consuming 6 pounds per year, which is crazy because they might consume 6 pounds of meat in a week.
Wow.
Right? But 6 pounds per year of pulses. And, ironically, some people will say, oh, well, those are the things that are problematic for us. That's a whole nother story. We can get into that if we want to.
I'm looking forward to that.
I refute that, though. I refute that story. The idea that lectins are the cause of the scourge of our existence, that legumes and whole grains are destroying our health. Completely refute that. And the highest quality evidence that we get, Doug, is they're called systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And basically what's happening here with these studies is that we're compiling all the available evidence into one place, and we're taking away the bias. You don't get to cherry pick the studies that you like. We're just going to take all the studies, put it together, and we're going to see how it shakes out. And when they do this, systematic reviews and meta-analyses with whole grains, with legumes, what they find for both, and it happens in parallel, like these are not the same food. They do share many of the same properties. And I think that's the reason why we get similar benefits. When people consume more whole grains, more legumes, they live longer. They're less likely to have a heart attack. They're less likely to die of heart disease. By the way, on the cardiovascular disease front, there's multiple risk factors that are addressed by consuming these foods. You lower your blood pressure, you lower your cholesterol, you reduce your exposure to diabetes, you control your blood sugar, you enhance insulin sensitivity. All right, all these things are good. They help us with our body weight. People lose weight when they consume more of these foods. Right? These are all ways in which we can protect ourselves from the number one cause of death, which is heart disease. Number two cause of death is cancer. We lower our risk of multiple forms of cancer. We're less likely to die of cancer. We're less likely to have a stroke. I already mentioned that you're less likely to get diabetes. You're less likely to get Alzheimer's disease. I could keep going.
So those are grains, legumes, and pulses.
Yes.
They all can be sprouted.
Yes.
So what is the difference and what is the benefit of sprouting them versus traditionally preparing them with heat?
Let's talk about the benefit of sprouting, period. Okay, so to me, sprouting is this magical thing. It's like literally a gift from nature, from my perspective. This is the way that I see it. Conceptually similar to the way that I feel about fermentation. We are transforming our food. The end product after sprouting is not the same as how it started. And the story here is that we are taking something and we are germinating it. We are bringing it to life. And it is the earliest version of a plant that if it were to be put into soil, it would continue to grow and mature and turn into a full-scale, plant of whatever variety we have in front of us. In this process, while the plant is germinating, what happens is that there is a symphony of enzymatic activity and change that is occurring on a microscopic level that's actually quite difficult for us to measure. So, we tend to focus on things like nutrients. So we'll say, look at the carbohydrate content, the protein content, the fiber. Okay, through the process of sprouting, we increase the protein content, we increase the fiber content. We also create new vitamins that weren't previously there. We add vitamin C, we add B vitamins. Through the process of sprouting, we deal with some of the things that are potentially holding back our nutrition on some level. So one of the criticisms of, for example, whole grains is the presence of phytic acid. Now, I think phytic acid is, in a way, this brake that's intended to sort of keep control over our nutrition. So it's not this poison. I don't think it's a poison. That being said, when we sprout our whole grains and our legumes, we reduce the phytic acid content. We reduce the lectin content of those foods. We reduce other anti-nutrients. We are enhancing the nutritional value of the food. Again, increasing the fiber, the protein, the vitamins. And the last part that I think is quite easy for people to miss, because again, science struggles to measure this. yet we know that it's happening, is let's go back to the symphony of enzymatic activity. This symphony of enzymes that's occurring that allows nature to transform from what was effectively, almost like a seed into a plant. This transformation that's taking place, those enzymes are present. And as we start to study them, the discovery in many cases is that they may be biologically active. Certainly they're biologically active for the plant, and they may be biologically active when we consume them as humans. So what we get as a result of this is we get something that's easier for us to digest, enhanced nutritional value, less anti-nutrients, and then we can get into this idea that there are enzymes and phytochemicals that provide additional benefit that weren't present prior to sprouting.
So within the sprouts, they're very young and tender. So they contain soluble and insoluble fiber. What role does soluble and insoluble fiber play in health?
Yeah. So obviously I wrote a book about fiber. Yes. And what I would say is let's look at the role that particularly soluble fiber, but in some cases insoluble fiber, plays in the body, because this to me is the most important part. There are multiple conversations that we could have about different things that the fiber does, but the most important part is that fiber is not digested by human enzymes. Fiber, which by the way, all plants contain fiber, all sprouts contain fiber. Sprouts are a great source of fiber. Again, enhancing the fiber content and making it more digestible. Humans lack the enzymes to break down fiber. The enzymes to break down fiber come from microbes. Microbes that are concentrated and focused within our colon, which is our large intestine. That is our gut microbiome. When we consume fiber, by definition, it is unchanged until it comes into contact with those microbes that exist in the colon. But when they do, when fiber comes into contact with microbes, it's like magic. It's like Harry Potter whipping a wand, and that fiber is no longer fiber. Now that fiber is this beautiful, powerfully anti-inflammatory, bioactive chemical, butyrate, acetate, or propionate. These are the short-chain fatty acids, Doug. And I wrote an entire book about the benefits of the short-chain fatty acids. They have benefits right there in the lining of your gut, in terms of your microbiome, throughout your body, your metabolism, your immune system, your hormones, your mood, your cognition, your genetic expression are all beneficially modified by short-chain fatty acids. These are, I've said this before and I'll say it right now. In my more than 20 years of study in medicine, these are by far the most anti-inflammatory healing things that I've ever come across. We get them through the consumption of fiber that you will find in sprouts. And this, Doug, explains why in the definitive fiber study, a systematic review and meta-analysis, they found that people who consume more fiber live longer, they're less likely to have a heart attack, they're less likely to die of heart disease, they're less likely to be diagnosed with multiple forms of cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, esophageal cancer, less likely to die from cancer, less likely to have a stroke, less likely to be diagnosed with diabetes, and in randomized controlled trials, they lose weight, lower their cholesterol, lower their blood pressure.
Well, when you talk about sprouts and these benefits, and they have fiber in them, and they have vitamins and minerals, we don't want to be extreme, right? So there's a level of extremism that's happening today. For some reason, like meat consumption was high, and then plant-based was coming up, and then meat consumption was going down. And now there's this trend towards people, on the ketogenic diet, high fat, high protein, and then people that are on, pure animal protein carnivore diet.
Right.
Like, what's going on? Like, what's driving that? And, what do you think of the health risks or consequences or benefits of that?
When dietary trends are not substantiated by scientific evidence, I have no choice but to call them a fad.
Okay.
And the science is not where these are trending. The science doesn't whiplash like this. These are trends that are driven by social media. TikTok, Instagram says, hey, here's what's hot. And people start doing it. And they get caught up in the emotion of it all. And the science actually is quite consistent. Now, this is not to say that there's only one path to health. I believe there are many paths to health. But I think that all of those many paths have something in common, which is the high consumption of plant-based foods, including sprouts.
Okay.
And so a moment ago, I said that when people consume more fiber, they have this laundry list of benefits that covers like 5 of the top 10 causes of death in the United States. And by the way, some of the top 10 causes of death are like accidents. So obviously that's not a dietary thing.
Right.
Right. But anyway, 5 of the top 10 causes of death in the United States are covered through increased fiber intake. So what happens if you eat 0 fiber?
Yeah, that's my question.
Right. And this is the question because that would be the antithesis of what science is telling us, right? Like in these studies, Doug, it's not just, hey, more fiber. They actually go into great detail to really understand. They're not just trying to say fiber is good. They want to actually understand this in great detail. And so one of the things that they do is they look for what's called a dose response. The dose response means that more consumption leads to more benefit. Less consumption leads to increased risk. The fiber content of animal-based foods is 0 across the board. What happens when you drive your fiber content down even lower than where Americans currently are? I have, all I can say based upon the available evidence is that the risk of disease goes up. Now, can you do this for a short period of time and emerge from this and be okay? Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do for a short period of time and emerge from them and be okay. People, do crazy things at times. I wouldn't recommend these dietary strategies for long-term health. I think that at the end of the day, we should be focusing on a balanced diet that's predominantly plants, and there's many paths or approaches that we can do within that.
You talk about sprouts being, when you sprout a seed, you get more protein.
Yeah.
Are sprouts a good source of protein? And where does protein fit into the fiber-fueled diet?
Protein is this nutritional concept that just never goes away. No matter what we learn, no matter what the science says, the public has been basically trained to believe that protein is the essential thing that we need. And here we are in Americans are not small, Doug. We're quite big. Go to Europe and look at the size of the average American compared to the average European. There's no absence of protein in the American diet. We are not a protein deficient society. If anything, we are over-consuming protein. Now, protein needs vary based upon an individual, based upon their body size, based upon their physical activity, based upon their goals, based upon their age and their stage in life. So it's not to say that there's just this one-size-fits-all protein and no one needs to worry about it. It's more to say that from my perspective as a medical doctor, first of all, my issue is that we're focusing on the protein as if it's the number one thing. So I think, Doug, the thing about protein that's important for people to understand is that, first of all plants contain protein. All plants contain protein. All plants contain all amino acids. It's not that the amino acid is completely missing from the plant. The issue is that if you were to eat a diet of only one plant, that particular plant may have specific essential amino acids that are harder for you to get. If you ate enough of the plant, you would get those amino acids. But this sort of exercise to me is like Silly, because no one eats that way, right? We eat a diverse diet. That's a mix and blend of multiple different plants, including multiple different sprouts. To me, sprouts can be an excellent source of protein within our diet. And there are different forms of sprouts, but the ones that I would really focus on the most are particularly the pulses. So legumes, meaning beans and peas and lentils. Those sprouts, to me, are the best. And the amount of protein that you get from them is amazing. To a lesser extent, the vegetable-based, seed-based sprouts, yes, they still have protein, right? It's just that you have to consume enough of them. But the whole grain and the pulse or legume-based sprouts, that's where the money's at when it comes to sprouts and protein.
So when you look at a ratio of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, like some people are 33, 33, 33, some are, 50, 40, 10, 20. Where are you? What's your ultimate recommendation for ratio of protein?
So I'm not a big macronutrient guy personally. I've never been one to track my own macronutrients or to advise people based upon macronutrients exclusively, because I think it's an oversimplification, right? Because you can apply these macronutrients and go eat trash food. To me, dietary quality is what matters. That being said, to me, if you look at the longest lived populations on the planet, they are predominantly carbohydrate-based diets. Now, when you get very high on carbs, like 70%, 75%, 80% carbs in your diet, that's only possible by eating ultra-processed food. You can't get that high of carbs by eating sprouts, because sprouts have fat.
Right.
To have protein, right? So the natural balance that exists within the plant is comparable to the natural balance that we want to exist within our own nutritional pattern, which is carbohydrates on the order of 55 to 65%. And then the rest is healthy fats and healthy sources of protein.
What is your source of omega-3 fatty acids, and how can you be more efficient in converting ALA into EPA and DHA?
So there's three major, and you just named them, there's three major omega-3 based fats. These are healthy fats. There's absolutely no disputing that. In the hierarchy of fat, this is the king. This is at the top. And the three types are ALA, EPA, and DHA. And ALA is what we get from different seeds. So chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, you also can find it in many nuts. So walnuts, for example, can be a great source of ALA. The body has the natural capacity to transform ALA into these other forms, EPA and DHA. People can also get EPA and DHA in their diet by consuming things like fish. The reason the fish have EPA and DHA is because the fish is consuming algae. So the origin of all omega-3s are plants. That's the original source. If you consume salmon, for example, the salmon didn't spawn this omega-3. It didn't, it wasn't created by the salmon. The salmon is just simply storing it.
Right.
Right. So this is where these healthy fats come from. Now, when it comes to consuming these, for example, chia, flax, hemp, and walnuts, these sources of ALA, number one, I think we should. All right. The reason why is not only are you getting omega-3 fats, which are healthy fats from them, you also simultaneously are getting fiber. Right. So when you eat a piece of salmon, the fiber content is 0. So this is one of the things. Now, in terms of that conversion, the way that we approach this is to reduce our omega-6 intake. And omega-6s are found in a number of different things, but particularly in unhealthy oils. So unhealthy oils are going to tend to be very high in these. People refer to them as PUFAs, but both omega-3s and omega-6s are PUFAs. But the omega-6s particularly are the ones that can sort of bind up the omega-3s and make it so they can't get converted easily. That being said, Doug, like as a medical doctor, when there's a question, you can check a person's blood level. And to me, this is completely fair game when it comes to this particular nutrient, omega-3, because you want to make sure that you have an adequate amount of DHA and EPA. Like, these are important things. And if you don't, what do? You can supplement. So that's the perfect opportunity where supplements make sense. And the beauty of an algae-based omega-3 is the purity and cleanliness of the product. Because you can grow organic algae and produce DHA and EPA that you know is 100% clean, and you can't say the same whether it's wild caught or farm raised. When it comes from fish, when it's fish oil, you can't guarantee the purity of the oil.
How much nori or how much wakame would you have to eat? I'm gonna restate the question. How much seaweed, nori, wakame, or other seaweed would you have to eat in order to get your omega-3s from the vegetable source?
So first of all, the average American is not consuming any seaweed, or the extent to which they consume seaweed is when they order sushi and it just happens to be there. It's not it's not intentional. The amount that you would have to consume, I think, would be quite substantial. I don't think it's a matter of a sheet or 2 sheets per day. It would be more. And there are other nutrients that exist within the seaweed, such as iodine. Now, iodine can be like completely healthy when it's in balance. In fact, there's a reason why most salt is iodized. They add that into the salt because it's missing as a nutrient in the average American's diet. So that's one of the beautiful things that we can get from this. But the problem is, I think, to achieve high levels of omega-3s, you have to go quite high at the amount of seaweed that you eat.
And what is this current demonization of seed oil?
That's an interesting thing, Doug. I think that once again, this is like a misunderstanding and sort of fad-based phenomenon fueled by social media that is completely independent and clearly not paying close attention to what the science actually says. The thing about it is, first of all, there's the debate around oils, as you know, Doug, right? There's a debate around oils, and there are many different types of oils, and regardless of which type they are, we know the fiber content, it's 0. That being said, clearly some oils are healthier than others. Like extra virgin olive oil is clearly healthier than alternative choices. But the debate around seed oils is trying to villainize omega-6 fats as if they're the least healthy fats that exist. And that's just quite simply a distraction from looking at the fact that saturated fat is clearly less healthy than omega-6s. And when we compare people who consume omega-6 fats to people who consume an excessive amount of saturated fat, the person who consumes an excessive amount of omega-6s is less likely to have a heart attack than the person who's consuming more saturated fat. So there is a hierarchy to all of nutrition, right? So specific fats like I said that omega-3 is at the top and the healthiest. I would clearly put omega-3s above omega-6s, but I would also clearly put omega-6s above saturated fat.
Okay, perfect. New topic, histamines. Like, what are they, and how can sprouts help the potential allergic reaction caused by them?
So histamine is first of all, natural part of our body. So you and I sitting here right now have histamine in our bloodstream. So it's impossible to be completely free of histamine. And that histamine that's in our bloodstream plays an important part of the way that our body functions on multiple different levels, including our mood, our cognition, the way our brain works, including our gut and the way that we digest our food. So I'm not here to villainize histamine, but like many other things in our health, when we fall out of balance, we run into trouble. And when there's excessive histamine in the bloodstream, for reasons that something is like some part of our body is not doing its job properly, when there's excessive histamine in the bloodstream, it's problematic. and it can cause symptoms and a reaction throughout the entire body. So, and the tricky part about this is that if a person is suffering from what we would describe as histamine intolerance, which basically means that histamine is causing this reaction in their body, the tricky part is that you, Doug, as a layperson, you might go to a doctor for your bloating, like you might go to a gastroenterologist for your bloating, and a different doctor because you have palpitations and lightheadedness, and a different doctor because you're having headaches. And those doctors will focus on their specific system and not necessarily see the whole person, which is you, and the fact that these things are all connected back to one source, which is histamine. So histamine intolerance can cause symptoms that include headaches, migraines, runny nose, congestion, classically after a meal, sinus issues, sinusitis. You can get postnasal drainage. It can affect your voice, cause a cough. From the cardiovascular perspective, you can get palpitations, funny heartbeats, lightheadedness, racing heart. From a digestive perspective, bloating is the classic symptom, but you can get almost any digestive symptom: constipation, diarrhea, discomfort. And then from a skin perspective, you could have hives, you could have flushing, or you could have a rash. Okay, so these are all different organ systems, but it's one person and there's one cause. And in the setting of histamine intolerance, it comes from our diet. Histamine is in our food. All food contains histamine. And that's because microbes produce histamine. The classic offenders are fermented foods and fish and shellfish. Those are the classic offenders. So for people that are sensitive to histamine, they struggle with those foods. All right, where do sprouts come in? The answer to that question is that sprouts, going back to the fact that sprouts have medicinal properties. Sprouts have the ability to help us reduce our body's histamine levels because sprouts naturally produce this enzyme called diamine oxidase. Diamine oxidase, or DAO, breaks down histamine. There's a benefit to the plant in breaking down, as it's growing, there's a benefit to the plant in breaking down histamine for the plant as it grows and matures. In our gut, you find diamine oxidase in the lining of your small intestine. Some people don't have enough diamine oxidase. And the result is that they develop these symptoms that we're talking about. They develop histamine intolerance. So if your body is not naturally producing enough DAO to regulate and balance the histamine that you consume in your diet, this is a perfect opportunity to supplement. And when I say supplement, I don't mean a capsule or a powder.
Right.
I mean literally sprouts, right? Sprouts are your supplement. It's just in whole food form. Because particularly when we sprout legumes, so peas or lentils, any beans, when we sprout them, they produce DAO. The amount of DAO that they produce is exceptional. So a quick example, a sprouted lentil has 280 times more DAO than when it started just 2 or 3 days ago.
Amazing.
Right. So there's this massive escalation of the production of this enzyme. And that enzyme can be on a scale that's large enough that it exceeds what you would get in a capsule form if you were to buy a supplement. And the way that you get this is by quite simply consuming these foods in your diet in raw form.
So 10 years ago, the raw food diet, right, raw plant food, raw vegan diet was very popular. Now it's almost like rare to even find a restaurant that is all raw. Is it healthy, or could someone live on a healthy raw vegan diet?
Could you live on a healthy raw vegan diet? Yes, properly planned. Right? You have to be thoughtful about specific nutrients to make sure that you're getting them. And there are some people who have health problems that would be hard for them to do. That being said, I think again, this is an example, Doug, where there's many paths that lead to health. And there are people who consume a raw vegan diet and they thrive. And there's some people actually that's hard for them. It's hard for them just to implement. They may not feel well from a digestive perspective. So I think you have to find what works best for you. And when it comes to your gut microbiome, there are clearly advantages to raw food. We just spoke about the fact that these enzymes exist, all right? Additionally, plants have a microbiome. Sprouts have a microbiome. All life on this planet, if it's alive, it has a microbiome. And when it's healthy, that's a healthy microbiome. And we receive that as a part of the gift in our nutrition. So we are not, again, like I'm against the oversimplification of saying we're just getting carbs and protein and fat. No. We're getting healthful forms of carbs, protein, and fat, along with vitamins and minerals and fiber and phytochemicals. And when it's raw, microbes. And so this to me is one of the overlooked things that exists in raw food. My personal perspective is that I wish for every person that they had at least some aspect of their diet that's raw food.
Yeah, I've been doing raw now that we're in April, 26 years.
Amazing.
26 years. And my diet is about 50% fruit.
Yep.
And 50% sprouts and other raw vegetables.
Yeah.
And some seaweed. So I don't know if I'm getting the exact amount. I did the omega quant level, and I was like at 6 on my omega 3s. So,
amazing.
So good, healthy omega 3s. I eat 2 sheets of nori, which I wrap my sprouts in.
Yep.
And that's my source of direct EPA or DHA. And the rest I'm getting from, I love the sprouted chia, I love the sprouted flax, but I'm just eating a lot of plants.
Yeah.
And, you know, you talk about diversity,
Yep.
right? Eating 30 different food items in a week.
Yeah.
Right? So normally the average American is consuming how many varieties of fruits and vegetables in a week?
Well, we know for a fact that 80% don't hit the target for fruit, 90% don't hit the target for vegetables, 90% don't hit the target for legumes, 98% don't hit the target for whole grains. And if you were to say diversity or variety in the diet, it's certainly less than 10. The number one source of vegetables in the American diet is the potato.
Wow. And are potatoes healthy?
They can be. They can be, but when we eat them as chips, right, or fries, which is how most people are eating them.
So there's this notion, or I guess a scientific fact, of a calorie.
Yeah.
Right? And some people, you know, very intelligent people will say, well, everything is a calorie and a calorie is a calorie.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that? And what is the significance, you know, of calories into your outlook on dietary consumption?
So I think that the calorie for the average person who is not a registered dietitian has become this massive distraction that actually misleads them.
Okay.
And I think that you could make a similar argument by making statements about like macronutrients of carbs are bad, protein is bad, fat is bad. Like there are good forms of food, right, that are part of a balanced diet. And there are less healthy forms of food that are basically crowding out the good stuff and replacing with stuff that's problematic. And so the problem is that when we make this all about calories, then basically what you're saying to me is if I go to McDonald's and I order whatever I feel like eating, regardless of what it is, as long as I observe the number of calories that you have instructed me to consume, then that is a healthful diet. And that is completely wrong. That is completely false. Now, if you want to lose weight, you do need to ultimately land in a calorie deficit. There's a reason why when we look at photos of our grandparents, Doug, people looked different than they do today, right? There was not the obesity epidemic that really started in the 70s and 80s. And a big part of the reason why is because they were eating real food. And that real food, they would sit down, have a meal with their family, and it would naturally trigger their satiety hormones. And the satiety hormones would tell them to stop eating. And they would naturally put themselves into a caloric balance. And we've seen this. There are tons of studies that we could point to that make it quite clear that when we eat a more whole food, less processed diet, we will naturally trigger those satiety hormones, the same ones, by the way, that are in Ozempic. We will naturally trigger those satiety hormones. It will tell us that we're full, and we will achieve a caloric balance. When we consume ultra-processed foods, we are more likely to overeat. They're designed to be hyperpalatable. They're designed to trigger parts of our brain that make us want to continually consume them. They're designed actually to confuse our body. Like, they've actually studied this, Doug. Ultra-processed foods are designed to confuse our body to not even know if we're hungry. And I know people can relate to this. I know they've sat there and ate food and not even known, like, I don't even know why I'm eating this. I'm not even hungry. I'm not really sure if I'm hungry. But you just are eating it, right? So in that setting, if that's what you're eating and you want to control your body weight, you do need to count calories. But that's not the way we should be eating.
Right. So you mentioned Ozempic. Like, what is Ozempic and why is it the rage right now? Why are people going crazy and taking Ozempic?
Ozempic is a purified medicinal form of a hormone that naturally exists in our body called GLP-1. All right, GLP-1 is sometimes referred to as an incretin. It's a gut hormone, so it's produced by our intestinal system. The gut microbes play a role in the amount of GLP-1 that gets produced by our body. And when our body is in balance, when we're eating a healthful diet that's rich in fiber and plant-based foods, our body naturally gets this satiety mechanism where we release GLP-1. It makes our stomach feel full. Our stomach slows down, stops moving as much as it was. And it tells our brain also, it basically sends a signal to our brain, you're good. Okay. So if you don't consume an adequate amount of fiber, which by the way is 95% of Americans, then those hormones are not getting triggered in the way that they should be. You have a natural deficiency of this hormone that's depending on the proper signals from your diet to activate it. The issue that exists with the drug is that, number one, it's expensive. Talking about thousands of dollars per month. Number two, if you stop using it, every single benefit that you received from it will wash away. So you are committing to taking this long term. Like, you don't do this and then stop. You do this and you will continue to do this. And if you're my age, you could be doing this for the next 50 years. And number three, so if I do this long term, what are the risks? We don't know.
When people say, like, the mechanism of feeling the satiety and creating the GLP-1, and you said the stomach is becoming more still.
Yep.
So is the food rotting in the stomach? Like, what's happening to the food, and what are the early known side effects?
Well, it's sort of what you would expect, which is a lot of people get nausea and queasiness. And the reason why is because you're shutting down the stomach. So if the stomach can't have natural motility to move and propel things forward and squeeze and grind our food, breaking it down, then the stomach is just sitting there. And when it sits there, that's actually quite unnatural. And that's actually, there are medical conditions that I have treated through the years called gastroparesis. And that's basically what I'm describing is medically induced gastroparesis. And it is not fun. All right, so that's the consequence of that. Now, is the food rotting in our stomach? I don't know if I would describe it as rotting, because the issue is that you're not going to fill your stomach up, right? Because you stop eating. So, but are you allowing natural motility and digestive mechanisms to work the way that nature intended it? Absolutely not. You are artificially changing the natural motility and flow of your digestive system.
So two questions stem from that. Is one, will you become deficient in phytonutrients, phytochemicals, fiber if you're not eating? And number two, you said there's no long-term side effects, but every day I'm seeing information of consequences, in the public of people who are taking this drug.
Well, let's be clear on that, though. I definitely did not say that there's no long-term consequences.
Okay.
What I'm saying is we don't know.
Right.
So it's a black box. So what I'm saying is you're committing to something without any safety, without any understanding of what, like basically you're a lab rat. You're basically a lab rat.
Science.
Yeah. Well, citizen science is when citizens get together to try to figure stuff out. In this setting, what you are a person who's just, you're trying something and you don't know if 5 years from now we discover that there's this horrible side effect. Now that is not, like I'm not trying to be catastrophic about it, but we got to be real. We don't really know what even happens here.
So would you ever recommend Ozempic to a patient?
So I don't want to like close the door on it entirely, but I think the widespread use of it to me is insane. And you asked about the fiber intake. So the issue, Doug, is that number one, let's look at the average fiber intake in the United States. The average woman consumes 15 grams of fiber per day. She should be 25. The average man consumes 18 grams of fiber per day. He should be 38. The recommended amount of fiber varies based upon how much food we're consuming. So like our caloric intake. This is why men are recommended to consume 38 because we naturally would consume more food.
Right.
All right, the problem with Ozempic is that we're taking a scenario where like 95% of people are fiber deficient in a major way, like way below. Women 10 grams below where they should be, men 20 grams below where they should be. We're going to make that worse because you're going to reduce your caloric intake. And there is nothing about Ozempic that requires you to increase the nutritional quality of your food. And this is the inherent problem. You can take Ozempic and eat trash and think that you're making yourself more healthy. And I don't think that's true.
So in the framework of someone who's on Ozempic, is there a off-ramp and a strategy that you could take someone who's getting the weight loss benefits, depriving themselves of the nutrients and the fiber, and intelligently create a healthy diet to complement Ozempic and then stage them progressively off?
We don't have data. So we don't have research to tell us what the answer to that question is. I don't think the drug companies will ever pay for those studies to be done. There are too many examples where the drug companies, and like with inflammatory bowel disease, we have biologics that cost $5,000 or $10,000 per month. They create a ramp to get on the drug. They give you reasons to get on it. They will never do the study to tell us how to get off of it.
So with your knowledge, right, and this is just, we're just two guys sitting behind a camera, but you happen to be a world-renowned expert gastroenterologist. If you were to hypothesize, what would a off-ramp diet be? What would that look like? If you were, you're not recommending it, you're just hypothesizing.
Yeah.
What would that look like to take someone who's on Ozempic today, they've lost their 50 pounds, they're happy as a clam,
right,
that they're now fitting in their college day attire.
Yeah.
And they're blind because no one is telling them about the potential risks and long-term side effects and the like. And they're asking me,
right,
and I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you, who is a doctor, just to hypothesize, what would a off-ramp be for that person?
If I'm building an off-ramp for the Ozempic, I want to enhance their nutritional quality, I want to rebuild their microbiome, and then I want to pull back on the Ozempic, and allow them to expand this new high quality
Right.
diet that they're now consuming.
So if we were to put out volunteers,
Yeah.
right, and saying, if you're on Ozempic and you want to get off Ozempic, high fiber diet would strategically, so you're saying increase the fiber content, increase the nutritional density, increase the fermented foods,
Yep.
and you're flooding your stomach. So you're actually feeling full. Now, would Ozempic, someone on Ozempic, not have the appetite to eat the requisite number of calorically rich, fiber-fueled items? Is there going to be a conflict where they won't have the appetite to eat what they need to do? Is that a paradox here?
Well, there's a bit of a that may be a bit of a paradox, and there's a bit of a moving target there, right? Because you might start with a person who your goal is weight loss, and guess what? That diet that you just described is going to help them to accomplish tremendous weight loss, right? Not everyone who uses Ozempic gets the exact same result. Some people don't lose weight; they do exist. It's not the majority. Some people lose 15% body weight, and that's substantial.
Yeah.
So getting a good result from your Ozempic, we don't have a study to prove this, but dietary quality and high fiber may help a person to achieve better results from their Ozempic because of the complementary nature of what you're doing.
Well, I have a million more questions on this, but I'm going to change topic. If we talk about diabetes, right? So an insulin type 1 diabetic, type 2 diabetes, and now we're going down the path of type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's, and dementia. What role does fiber and diet play in the potential of reversing type 2 and type 3 diabetes?
There's multiple aspects. So first of all, type 2 diabetes is one of the most reversible conditions that exists, and most people don't realize that. That for a huge percentage, I don't want to pretend all, for a huge percentage of people who develop type 2 diabetes, if they were to change their diet and lifestyle, they would reverse the condition and it would go away completely.
Really? That's a fact.
Yes.
So how do they go about doing it? You have someone who has fasting blood sugar levels from 126 to 500. Like, what's their action plan? And I guess they start giving insulin at 130.
Yeah, it depends on the specific person. There's many different medicines. I've treated, I'm a board certified internal medicine doctor, so I've treated many patients with diabetes, including with these medicines, including with insulin. You'd prefer not to, right? Because you're grinding and fighting against the current. The current, when it's going against you, is insulin resistance, right? I much prefer it when the current is pushing me. When the current is making my life easy and makes me look like I'm a great swimmer.
Right.
Right? And that's what insulin sensitivity is. Insulin sensitivity is when we switch the pendulum away from insulin resistance to the opposite side, where we're making it easier on our body. And this is metabolic health. And the role that our diet plays in this is key, because we have the capacity to change in a very short period of time, like 2 weeks. We can change insulin resistance versus insulin sensitivity in our body. And how do you do that? By eating more plants. So fiber-rich food, once again, it comes back to fiber. This is the beauty of consuming sprouts, is that all sprouts contain fiber. And when we consume these high-fiber foods, once again, so there's a few parts to this real quick. One of it is the absorption of sugar. All right, so we are far better off when the absorption of sugar is slow and sustained over a few hours rather than a hard spike. Fiber allows us to have that slow and sustained release of sugar into our body because it slows it down. So simply consuming fiber with meals can improve our blood sugar control, like instantly. All right, that meal. Secondly, fiber, as we've been discussing, comes into contact with our microbes. The microbes release short-chain fatty acids, and the short-chain fatty acids have metabolic effects. And by working through the G protein coupled receptors, there's a couple of them. By working through these specialized receptors, short-chain fatty acids enhance our insulin sensitivity. So if you're looking to improve your insulin sensitivity, that's what you eat. You consume fiber. And this, by the way, explains, Doug, what's called the second meal effect. Have you ever heard about this?
Please elaborate.
Okay. So sometimes they call this the lentil effect, but it's more than just lentils. Basically, when you consume a meal that is high in fiber and resistant starches, and the reason why they say lentils is because lentils are a great source of fiber and resistant starches. And guess what? You can get even more fiber by sprouting them.
Right, sprouted lentils.
Yeah, sprouted lentils. And I think, by the way, sprouted lentils are a great place to start for sprouting because they're quick and easy. All right. So when we consume more lentils that have fiber and resistant starches, we are fueling our body with these short-chain fatty acids, which enhance insulin sensitivity. And the second meal effect is when we have a meal right now, and then, for example, that could be our lunch, and then with dinner, we actually have better blood sugar control. And the reason why is because of the insulin sensitivity that we received from the prior meal.
Wow.
So it can happen that fast.
So this, from a level of sprouts, like sprouts are low cost to grow your own sprouts. And is it possible, and I'm not asking you to recommend this to someone, but is it possible for someone to live on sprouts for periods of time and get the fiber and get what they need to be healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've proven it.
Yeah,
because that's what you do.
Well, I've done 30 days, a month at a time of all sprouts only.
Yeah.
And I did it out of necessity because I was living in the desert. Right. And I was in a desert and I was in the food desert and I had my sprouts and there was COVID going on and I didn't want to leave. And so we lived on our little ranch and we grew and ate sprouts.
Yeah.
And so I thrived on it.
Yeah.
But I just, it's just not a common thing. You're not going to look up sproutarians and see a list of thousands of people. But
I actually try to push people into a sprout-only diet. No, probably not, honestly. Right. But to me, what's exciting is that we can add more variety to our diet by sprouting. Because to me, I mentioned earlier, it's the process of transformation. The food is now different. And because it's different, it has a different effect on our body. And that is what this concept of dietary diversity is about. Mm. So to me, a lentil compared to a sprouted lentil is two different plants.
Right.
And we can enhance our dietary diversity by introducing a variety of different sprouted foods into our diet, and it helps us to get as much variety as possible.
So on the performance for athletes, for runners, for people who want to work out in the gym and build muscle,
yeah.
How does someone build muscle on a plant-based diet? How does someone build endurance, on a plant-based diet? And my bias is sprouts. So how do sprouts fit into that?
Right. So these are different forms of exercise. First of all, different forms of exercise. The beauty and I think quite fascinating thing is that different forms of exercise have differential effects on our gut microbiome. Hmm. Much like different types of food have a different effect on our microbiome. So they did a study, it was out of Boston, it's either Harvard or MIT, where they looked at distance runners, marathon runners, and discovered those marathon runners had this bacteria called the Veillonella. So they asked the question, their scientists were like, wow, this is fascinating. What does Veillonella do? The answer was Veillonella helps you to break down lactic acid.
Wow.
Lactic acid is what accumulates in the muscle that causes muscle fatigue. So if you're an endurance runner, the focus is on endurance. right? And so this microbe is helping you to accomplish your goal. Flip side, if you're a bodybuilder and you're building for muscle, then you're doing weight-based training. And so weight-based training is in some ways an inflammatory process, right? So you inflame the body heals from that inflammation, and the result is you are stronger. And so what's interesting is that they looked at a group of rugby players from Ireland and discovered that their training regimen, of course, rugby guys are big muscular guys, their training regimen was associated with more short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria. The short-chain fatty acids are anti-inflammatory. So it helps you in that recovery process. So, so what would I advise people when it comes to these things? First of all, if you are like working to build muscle mass, this is one of those examples. We were talking about protein earlier. The protein demands of a person who wants to add muscle are different than the person who's not trying to actively build muscle mass. You need more protein. It's completely possible on a plant-based diet. You just have to choose plant-based sources that have a higher concentration of protein. And the pulses and the whole grains are a great place to start. And the sprouted versions have even more protein. So to me, that's where my emphasis would be. You probably would want to balance that out with some other foods. Like, for example, tofu can be a great source of protein. Tempeh can be a great source of protein that you would add to this. But your foundation would be pulses and whole grains, ideally sprouted. Okay? If I'm a runner and I'm going for endurance, they consume these gels. Yeah. The reason they're doing the gel is for simple sugar. You don't need a gel to get access to simple sugar. Simple sugar exists naturally in fruit. So when you're in the process of actively running, you're trying to replete those depleted carbohydrate stores. You need sugar in order to do that. This is where fruit comes into play. So fruit can be an aspect that you have while you're actually doing the endurance exercise. But then the key, you mentioned, for example, ice baths. The secondary key is recovery. And for recovery, we need antioxidants. Antioxidants are the polyphenols. Polyphenols are found in all plant-based foods, and they are enhanced in sprouts. So we want, again, a high polyphenol diet to make it so that we can recover from running that marathon much easier. That's where plant-based foods, particularly sprouts, come into play.
Can you be recovering while you're running in these endurance races?
Well, you can be fueling your body with the proper food that helps you to perform while you're running. And like, you don't need to consume just a gel. You can be fueling your body with the proper food that will initiate that recovery process immediately.
So can you envision someone running an Ironman or running an ultra marathon fueled by sprouts?
Of course.
So no risk.
I mean, there's risk to running these kinds of things regardless of what you eat.
On a nutritive basis, they can be getting what they need.
Absolutely.
And you eat sprouts every day in your smoothie and your broccoli sprouts.
And that's a foundational tool. So, because the issue from my perspective, Doug, the challenge that we all face is that we wake up every day and I have a morning routine and then my day goes crazy. And it gets frayed and it could go in a million different directions. And I couldn't tell you when I'm going to eat, what I'm going to eat. It's very hard to predict, right? So to me, how do we approach this? Number one, we build healthy habits. So building this into your morning routine is a strategy to ensure that you get it on a daily basis. The second approach that I use is I like to know what my foundational foods are. So with my book Fiber Fueled, I created an acronym that helps me to remember, here are the foods that I want to get into my diet on a daily basis. And the acronym is F goals, F for fiber, F goals. And S in F goals stands for sprouts. So as I'm going through my day, I want to think about what are the things that are so important to me that I want them on my plate. And I try to make sprouts a part of that.
Amazing. Well, Will, thank you so much for sharing your breadth of knowledge and the depth of knowledge and your passion, and you're helping so many people. And I'm so grateful for you taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Doug. I love you, brother.
I love you. This is great. Thank you.